you are comfortable. This first story we are reading today is called Choosing a Wife. Very, very old-fashioned already. Once there was a shepherd who knew 3 sisters. They were all beautiful, and they were all kind, and he wanted to marry one of them. But which one? How could he choose one from the others when he liked them all equally? Invite them all to eat cheese with you, said the shepherd's mother, and watch how they eat it. The shepherd couldn't see how that could possibly help, but he had to choose somehow, or he would never be married, so he decided to do as his mother had suggested. The 3 beautiful sisters came to the house, and they and the shepherd sat together round the table, on which the shepherd's mother had placed a platter of cheese. Each slice of cheese was smooth and creamy, and shaped like a crescent moon. It looked very tempting, but at the widest edge of each slice was a layer of thick, hard rind. The shepherd watched carefully as the 3 sisters took cheese and began to eat. The first sister couldn't wait to begin. She pushed the cheese into her mouth without bothering to take the rind off at all. The second sister took a knife and cut the rind from the cheese, it was true, but she cut away half the smooth, creamy cheese with it. The third sister took a knife and cut away the rind too, but she cut neither too little nor too much. She didn't waste even the tiniest piece of the smooth, creamy cheese shaped like a crescent moon. The shepherd did not marry the first sister. He said she was greedy. He did not marry the second sister either. He said she was careless. But he did marry the third sister because, he said, she was careful and thrifty, as well as beautiful and kind, and they lived happily ever after. That was a short story. The Golden Goose. Once there was a man who had 3 sons. One day the eldest went to the forest to chop wood. At midday, as he was eating his lunch, an old man appeared from nowhere and asked for a small bite to eat. "Go away," said the eldest son. "I share my lunch with no one." He didn't know the old man had magic powers, and he thought it was just bad luck when his axe slipped as he worked that afternoon, and he cut his thumb. The following day the middle son went to the forest. At midday the old man appeared again. The middle son was as greedy and as ill-mannered as his elder brother. "Go away," he said. "I share my lunch with no one." He too thought it was just bad luck when a log fell on his toe and bruised it so badly that he limped all the way home. On the 3rd day it was the turn of the 3rd and youngest son to go to the forest to chop wood. At midday, as the youngest son, who is called Dummling, sat eating his lunch, the old man appeared yet again, and once more asked for a small bite to eat. "Come and sit beside me," said Dummling. "What is mine is yours also. Eat your fill." When the old man had finished every scrap of Dumling's lunch, he pointed to an old and rotting tree stump. "Cut that down," he said, "and you will find a reward for having a kind heart." And with that he disappeared as mysteriously as he had arrived. Dummling was curious, and thought the tree was too old and rotten to be of any use to a woodcutter. He chopped it down as the old man had suggested. Lying unharmed at the base of the stump on a bed of dried leaves was a goose with golden feathers. It let Dummling stroke its head and nestled quietly in his arms when he picked it up. "I can't leave you here," said Dummling. "Someone is sure to kill you for the sake of your golden feathers. I think I had better take you with me." Dummling was a long way from home, and he decided to spend the night at an inn. The landlord of the inn had 3 daughters. One of them looked at the goose's golden feathers and made up her mind to have one. That night, as Dummling lay asleep, she tried to pluck a feather from the goose's back. She touched the goose very gently. She didn't want it to make a noise and wake Dummling. But as she grasped the feather and tried to pull it, she found to her dismay that her hand would not move. She tried to let go of the feather and found that she couldn't. "Oh, oh," she cried softly. "My hand is stuck fast. Sister, please pull me away." Her sister came to help her, but as soon as she touched her dress, she found that she was stuck too. The same thing happened to the third sister when she tried to pull the second sister free. Dummling had decided to see something of the world before he went home, and the next day he set off across country with the golden goose tucked safely under his arm. He did not seem to notice the three sisters trailing awkwardly behind him like a broken daisy chain. He didn't seem to notice either when a disapproving clergyman tried to pull the girls away and was caught himself, or when the clergyman's young assistant, who could not let go of the clergyman's coat-tails, or for that matter, the three diggers who were going home to lunch when they joined in the game and discovered too late that it was not a game at all. Or, if Dummling did notice, he pretended not to. Meanwhile, his brothers and family are still waiting for the logs that he doesn't have. He had heard of a king whose daughter had been promised in marriage to anyone who could make her smile. When the sad princess saw Dummling with his golden goose tucked under his arm and all the people tagging along behind it, the first one stuck to the goose and the rest stuck to another as if by magic, which they were, of course, and all tripping over one another's heels and bumping into one another's elbows, she not only smiled, she laughed until she cried, as did everyone else who saw that strange procession. Dummling and the princess were married and lived happily ever after. No one knows what happened to the golden goose and the people who were stuck to it. Maybe the magic wore off, maybe it didn't. Maybe they are wandering still. Interesting. Next one is Jack and the Beanstalk. But if I've learned anything from this book, it's to not expect what you already know. Jack lived with his mother in a tumble-down house. They were so poor they never seemed to have enough to eat, and one day Jack's mother said, "Jack, you must take the cow to market and sell her." "If we do that, we will have no milk," said Jack. "If we don't sell her, we will soon have nothing to eat at all," replied his mother. And so, very sadly, Jack led the cow to market. He was about halfway there when he met an old man. "Is your cow for sale?" asked the old man. Jack said that she was. "Then I'll give you 5 beans for her," said the old man. Jack laughed. "You can't buy a cow with 5 beans," he said. "Ah," said the old man, "but these are magic beans. You will make a fortune with them." Jack couldn't resist such a good bargain. He gave the cow an affectionate pat, handed her halter to the man, and took her the 5 beans in exchange. Jack's mother was furious. "We needed money to buy food," she scolded. "How could you be so stupid?" She snatched the beans from Jack's hand and tossed them out of the window. "That's what I think of your bargain," she said. Jack went sadly to bed without any supper. He supposed he had been rather silly. He would have to go in search of the work the following day, for he couldn't let his mother starve. Next morning he woke up bright and early. Instead of the bright rays of sunlight which usually lay across his bedroom floor, there was a large shadow. He went to the window to see what was blocking out the sun. Growing from the ground below his window was the biggest beanstalk in the world. It reached up, up, up into the sky, and the top of it was lost among the clouds. The old man was right. They were magic beans, he said. I'm going to climb to the top to see what I can find. Jack's mother begged him not to go, but Jack had made up his mind. He climbed and climbed, up and up. He climbed through white swirling clouds until he came to the very tip of the beanstalk, and from the top of the beanstalk he stepped into another land. It was a land just like his own, except that everything in it was twice and 3 times as big. All the climbing had made him hungry, so he went to the door of the only house he could see and knocked boldly. The door was opened by a huge woman. She was so big, she was surely the wife of a giant. Jack persuaded her to give him some breakfast. He had just finished eating when he heard footsteps as heavy as falling boulders, and then a voice as loud as thunder. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Quick as a flash, the giant woman bundled Jack into the oven. Shh, be very quiet, she said. That's my husband. He eats boys like you for breakfast. The huge woman, who was indeed the wife of a giant, told her husband he was mistaken and put a bowl of porridge on the table. When he had eaten, the giant called for his hen. Lay, he ordered, and the hen lay a golden egg. Jack, who could see everything that was happening through a crack in the oven door, determined to have that hen for himself. Presently the giant's head began to nod. Soon he was asleep. As quick as a bee about to sting, Jack left the oven, picked up the hen, ran to the top of the beanstalk, and climbed down to earth again. Mother, we are going to be rich, he said. A few days later he decided to pay another visit to the land of the giants. His mother begged him not to go again, but he was determined. This time he crept secretly into the big house and hid. He waited for the giant to come home. Presently he heard footsteps as heavy as falling boulders, and a voice as loud as thunder. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. I'll help you look for him, said the giant's wife. If it's the boy who stole our little hen, you shall have him for breakfast. But Jack had hidden himself well, and in the end they had to give up looking. After breakfast the giant called for his magic harp. Sing, ordered the giant, and the harp sang sweetly. Presently the giant's head began to nod. Soon he was asleep. Jack jumped from his hiding place, snatched up the magic harp, and started to run. Master, master, called the magic harp. The giant woke with such a roar that the people in the land below the beanstalk thought the sky was falling in. Fee, fi, fo, fum, he bellowed. I do smell the blood of an Englishman. He ran after Jack with such great lumbering, thundering steps. Jack was small and nimble, and had a good start. When he reached the top of the beanstalk, he tucked the harp inside his shirt and began to climb down. The beanstalk began to shake and creak and groan as the angry giant followed him. Faster went Jack, faster and faster. Mother, he called as he neared the bottom, bring me an axe, quickly. He jumped to the ground and took the axe. He swung his arms as though he were the strongest man in the world, and with 3 hefty cuts the beanstalk came tumbling to the ground. There was a terrible roar as the giant fell. He made a hole so big when he hit the ground that both he and the beanstalk disappeared into it, and were lost forever. As for Jack and his mother, well, they lived happily ever after with the hen who laid golden eggs, and the harp which sang beautiful songs. They were never poor again. Here's another classic, Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. Once there was a little princess whose skin was white as snow, whose cheeks were red as roses, and whose hair was black as ebony. Her name was Snow White. She had a stepmother who was beautiful and very vain. Every day she would look into her magic mirror and ask, Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all? the mirror always answered that the Queen was, until one fateful day when it replied, "Thou, Queen, art fair and beauteous to see, but Snow White is fairer far than thee." The Queen was so angry she called a servant and ordered him to take Snow White to the forest and kill her. The servant loved Snow White. He could not kill her, but when he returned from the forest, he told the Queen he had obeyed her order, for he knew she would send someone else to do the deed if she knew Snow White were still alive. Snow White wandered alone through the forest until she came to a small cottage. Inside, everything was arranged in sevens. She was so hungry she couldn't resist taking a small bite from each of the 7 pieces of bread set upon 7 plates on the wooden table. And then, because she was tired, she lay on one of the 7 beds and fell asleep. She was found by the 7 dwarfs who owned the cottage, when they returned from a day's digging at the mines. They took pity on Snow White when she told them her story, and she said she could stay with them. The following day the wicked Queen asked her magic mirror who was the fairest in the land. "Queen, thou art of beauty rare," it replied, "but Snow White living in the glen with the 7 little men is 1,000 times more fair." The Queen was very angry because she knew her servant had deceived her. She quickly dressed herself as a peddler and went to the dwarf's cottage. "Will you buy a pretty petticoat, child?" she asked Snow White, who, alas, didn't recognize her. The wicked Queen slipped the petticoat over Snow White's head and pulled the tape so tightly around her waist that Snow White stopped breathing. The dwarfs found her lying on the floor when they got home. At first they thought she was dead, but when they saw the tight lace they guessed what had happened and loosened it, and Snow White began to breathe again. The Queen thought she had killed Snow White. When the magic mirror said that Snow White was still the fairest in the land, she turned white with rage. She dressed herself in different disguise and hastened to the dwarf's cottage with a poisoned comb in her peddler's basket. It was so pretty that Snow White could not resist trying it in her hair. The instant it touched her head she fell to the floor. When the dwarfs came home, they took the comb from her and revived her. "You must not speak to anyone," they said. "The wicked Queen is trying to kill you." When the magic mirror told the Queen that Snow White was still the fairest in the land, she determined to kill her or die herself in the attempt. This time she took a poisoned apple to the cottage. Alas, Snow White forgot the dwarf's warning and took a bite from the apple. This time the dwarfs could not revive her. This time the magic mirror replied to the Queen, "Thou, Queen, art the fairest in all the land." The dwarfs laid Snow White in a crystal case in a forest glade, and kept watch over her day and night, for they had grown to love her. One day a prince came riding by. When he saw Snow White, whose skin was still as white as snow, whose cheeks were still as red as roses, whose hair was still as black as ebony, he pleaded with the dwarfs to let him take her home to his palace. The prince looked so sad when they refused that the dwarfs changed their minds and agreed to his request. And then, just as the prince was lifting Snow White onto his horse, the piece of apple, which unbeknown to anyone had been lodged in her throat, fell from her mouth, and she opened her eyes. The wicked Queen could not believe it when her mirror said, "O Queen, although you are of beauty rare, the prince's bride is 1,000 times more fair." When she saw that Snow White was the prince's bride, she choked with rage and died. Now Snow White had nothing to fear from the wicked Queen, and she lived happily with her prince and visited the 7 little dwarfs as often as she could. This story I recognize, but it's spelled Hamlin rather than Hamlin. The town of Hamlin was plagued by rats. They chased the cats and ate the grain. They frightened the babies and carried off apples. There were so many of them that it was impossible to walk in the streets without falling over at least a dozen. No one dared to sit on a chair without looking first to make sure that it wasn't already occupied by a rat. It became impossible to work properly. It became impossible to play properly. The people of Hamlin tried in every way they could to rid the town of rats, but everything they tried failed. The mayor and his council were so desperate, they promised a huge reward to anyone who could find a solution to the problem. The whole town was in despair when a stranger arrived dressed in a coat of many colours. "I have been told there is a reward for the man who rids the town of rats," he said. Anything, if only you will help us," said the mayor. The stranger in the pied coat walked to the middle of the town square and took a small pipe from his pocket. "What is he going to do?" whispered the townfolk. The stranger put the pipe to his lips and began to blow. As he blew a tune that grew gayer and gayer, the rats began to creep from their holes to listen to him. When there were many gathered about his feet, he began to walk through the town. Up streets and down streets he went. As he passed each door, the rats left what they were doing and scampered after him. When he reached the town gate, every rat in Hamlin was behind him. Still he strode on, across the meadow towards the river. "What is he going to do?" asked the townsfolk. When he reached the river bank, the piper in the pied coat stepped straight into the water. It came to his knees. The gay tune he was piping grew sweeter, and the rats followed straight after him, and were all drowned. The townsfolk shouted and cheered, but they were an ungrateful lot, and as soon as the last rat was gone, they hurried back to their dinners and their games. No one even offered the piper a towel on which to dry his feet. The piper went to the mayor and asked for his reward. The mayor faced him with a scowl. Now the rats were gone, he saw no reason to part with his money. "Reward," he said. "What reward? There is no reward. Be gone, leave the town at once, you're not wanted here." The piper did not say another word, but as he walked through the streets of Hamlin to the town gate, he began to blow another, gayer, prettier tune on his pipe. This time it wasn't the rats which ran from the houses, it was the children. Every child in the town wanted to dance to the piper's tune, and they followed him through the gate and across the meadow. But this time, instead of going to the river, he turned towards the bare mountain. One small girl was lame. She couldn't keep up with the dancing, skipping procession of laughing children. She was the only one that saw what happened. The side of the mountain opened, she cried, and all the children followed the piper inside. I tried to find the door so that I could follow too, but it was closed. The townsfolk were in despair. They searched the mountainside for days, but they never saw their children again. They had disappeared as surely as the rats had disappeared, and they had only themselves to blame. Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time there was a girl called Gretel and a boy called Hansel. One night as they lay in bed, they overheard their father and stepmother talking. "We would be much better off if we had only 2 mouths to feed," said their stepmother. "Tomorrow you must take the children to the forest and leave them there." She nagged and grumbled so much about being poor that at last their father agreed to do as she asked. Gretel began to cry. "I'll take care of you," whispered Hansel, and when everyone was asleep, he crept outside and filled his pockets with white pebbles. The next day their father left them in the forest, saying he would come back for them later. The children waited and waited. They waited so long that the moon rose above the trees and cast a blue light across the ground, and then Gretel saw a trail of white pebbles leading from the clearing. Unnoticed even by Gretel, Hansel had dropped them, one by one, along every path they had followed, and now the way home was clear. That night they heard their stepmother talking again. "A fine mess you made of that," she said. "Make sure you take them to the very heart of the forest tomorrow. We don't want them finding their way home again." "I'll gather some more pebbles," whispered Hansel, but when he went to fill his pockets, he found the door of the cottage locked and bolted. The next day everything happened as it had done before, except that this time, instead of pebbles, Hansel left a trail of white breadcrumbs. Alas, when the moon rose and the children looked eagerly for the crumbs to shine in the moonlight and show them the way home, they discovered there were no crumbs. The birds had eaten them. Now they were really lost. They had been in the forest 3 days when they came upon a very strange house. Its walls were made of gingerbread, its roof was covered with biscuit tiles, its windows made of clear see-through toffee. The old woman who lived there invited them inside. "How kind you are," said Gretel. "How horrid she is," gasped Gretel, when the witch, for the woman was a witch, pushed Hansel into a cage and locked him in. He," said the witch. "Now, little girl, you can feed your brother every day until he's fat enough to eat." Every day the witch made Hansel eat pies and cakes and custard. She gave Gretel nothing but crusts and gravy. "Don't worry," whispered Hansel, "I won't let her eat me." And every day when the witch ordered him to put out his finger so that she could see how fat he was getting, she pushed a stick through the bars instead. The witch couldn't understand why he stayed so thin, and then one morning she said crossly, "Get the oven ready, girl, I'm tired of waiting." Poor Gretel. The tears rolled down her cheeks as the witch made her stoke the fire. The oven got hotter and hotter. Poor Hansel, what could she do to save him? But it wasn't Hansel the witch had decided to cook, it was Gretel herself. "Climb into the oven and test the temperature," she cackled. Hansel whispered a warning, and Gretel realized just in time what the witch was about to do. The witch didn't get a chance to push her. Gretel pushed the witch instead. "Let me out!" screamed the witch as Gretel slammed the oven door shut. Gretel pretended not to hear. She let Hansel out of the cage and they ran into the wood without a backward glance. They found a path which led them home. Their father was overjoyed to see them, and they were overjoyed when he told them that their stepmother had gone. And so, once again, the 3 of them lived happily together. Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. Her hair doesn't look very gold. Once there were 3 bears. A father bear, a mother bear, and a baby bear. One morning, Mother Bear made the porridge for breakfast as usual. "The porridge is exceedingly hot this morning," said Mother Bear. "Let us go for a stroll in the wood while it cools," said Father Bear. There was someone else walking in the wood that morning, a little girl with the long golden hair, called Goldilocks. She could smell the beautiful aroma of porridge, and she followed it, her nose twitching, until she came to the open window of the bear's house. When she saw the 3 bowls of steaming hot porridge on the table, they made her feel so hungry she climbed in through the window without so much as a "Please, may I?" "I think I'll try some of that," she said. She tried the porridge in the large bowl first. It was so hot it burnt her tongue. "Ouch," she said, and dropped the spoon. The porridge in the middle-sized bowl was far too sweet. "Ugh," she said, and dropped that spoon too. The porridge in the small bowl was just the way she liked it. "Ooh, lovely," she said, and ate it all up. When the small bowl was quite empty, she walked around the house, opening cupboards and looking at this and looking at that, and trying everything she could see. She sat on Father Bear's big chair. "Oh no," she said, "this is much too hard." She sat on Mother Bear's middle-sized chair. "Oh no," she said, "this is much too soft." She sat on Baby Bear's chair. "Ooh, lovely," she said, "this is so comfortable." But she wriggled and fidgeted about so much that one of the legs snapped in 2, and she fell to the floor. She picked herself up and went into the bear's bedroom. She tried Father Bear's big bed. "Oh no," she said, "this is much too bumpy." She tried Mother Bear's bed. "Oh no," she said, "this is much too squashy." She tried Baby Bear's small bed. "Ooh, lovely," she said, "this is so comfortable." And she fell fast asleep with her head on Baby Bear's pillow. When the bears got home, they could tell at once that someone had been inside their house. "Who has been eating my porridge?" growled Father Bear. "Who has been eating my porridge?" growled Mother Bear. "And who has been eating my porridge and finished it all up?" squeaked Baby Bear. "Who has been sitting on my chair?" growled Father Bear. "Who has been sitting on my chair?" growled Mother Bear. "And who has been sitting on my chair and broken it?" squeaked Baby Bear, and he burst into tears. "Who has been lying on my bed?" growled Father Bear. "Who has been lying on my bed?" growled Mother Bear. "Someone has been lying on my bed, and she is still here," squeaked Baby Bear. "Look!" Goldilocks opened her eyes and sat up. When she saw the three bears staring at her, she jumped off the bed and out through the window so quickly the bears were taken by surprise. The bears didn't bother to chase after her. She looked so frightened they knew she had learned her lesson and would never go uninvited into someone else's house again. Instead, Mother Bear made some more pottage for Baby Bear. Father Bear mended his chair, and they all sat down and had